So thank you so much for joining us today for this very crucial conversation on women in peacekeeping. We appreciate your presence today.
Thank you very much for your time and for your interest in the work that the fund is doing.
Absolutely. And I think it should be brought to limelight more so that more people know that UN Women is doing such amazing work for women in peacekeeping, substantial work on the ground. So I'll just dive deep into the questions. Now I've got 10 questions for you, and they're very like a mix of very good questions and like incisive questions that would help people understand what Elsie Initiative Fund is all about and your work with you and women. So my first question is that the Elsie Initiative Fund's four outcome model is something that's very unique. So it moves from identifying barriers and improving conditions on the field. So why was this holistic approach necessary, apart from just increasing recruitment numbers for women?
Okay. So on that, I would kind of, my first starting off point would be that instead of focusing on recruitment numbers, we do have this holistic approach because if you just focus on numbers alone, you're kind of treating the symptoms and not the cause.
Absolutely.
Um, and so for us, looking at systems, the laws, the institutional policies, leadership cultures, social expectations, for example, all of those can either enable or actually prevent women from deploying
Yeah.
and from reaching operational readiness, but also from just being able to be a member and a valued member of that security institution. So we
Hmm.
say that recruitment, it's the end point perhaps, but it is not the solution. So we have this methodology where we really want to understand what are the barriers to women in a particular security institution. And it's very dependent institutions, even within the same country. So if we look at Air Force, Army, Navy,
Yeah.
they all have their own institutional culture as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that first outcome is identifying the barriers. And then once we've identified those through this barrier assessment methodology, we then look at how can we support TPCCs kind of on those uh, many different, or the 10 barriers that have been identified in that MOEP barrier assessment
Hmm.
model. And MOEP stands for Measuring Opportunities for Women in Peace Operations.
Hmm.
So that looks at 10 issue areas, and then we can provide funding for TPCCs to really try and design projects to really get after those and address
Yeah.
those barriers. And then our fourth outcome is really looking at what are the barriers, what are the issues within a UN peacekeeping operation to really try and improve the living and the operational or the accommodation and work barriers within the work environment.
Hmm.
And that is not easy to do by a mission. Again, there's a number of different cultures because there's a number of different countries there, but
Absolutely.
we
It's very
need
multifaceted.
right. It is, and we need them to also provide us with kind of analysis of what are those issues in the mission itself.
So, as per your reports, you must have done like over a dozen of barrier assessments. So far, what is the most politically sensitive or maybe deeply institutional barrier that you've uncovered so far, and how have you addressed that barrier?
Um, we could spend an hour a day, a week talking about this one. I would say that the most deeply rooted barrier really is kind of the culture of the organization itself. So if we're talking about a military, a police institution, or a gendarmerie,
Yeah.
um, and I would say yes, it's the culture of the organization. And we know that all of these institutions really are very masculine
Yes.
cultures. And there's a number of informal norms within these institutions.
Yes.
Um, there's gatekeeping by senior men within these institutions.
Yes.
Um, and so sometimes the transparency of decisions within these institutions is very vague.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it it can also be politically kind of explosive because peacekeeping allowances themselves are lucrative.
Yeah.
So that may drive this gatekeeping within the organization.
Yeah.
And when we look at these masculine kind of norms, um, they may value kind of toughness, and women who challenge that by by leading or questioning can face kind of resistance within that organization. They can also face isolation and harassment. So when you look at ways to, or understanding for us, that is
Mm.
deep rooted,
Mm-hmm.
and it is, yeah, institutionally deep rooted. And if perhaps we look at the most kind of sensitive, um, one of the issues that we spend a lot of time talking about is cultural, and kind of included in that is also sometimes religious norms.
Yes.
And these sit underneath policies and practices within TPCCs. They
Yeah.
also sit underneath kind of communities, whether it's the community that the peacekeeping mission is working in or within those TPCCs. So that's a lot broader
Mm.
than just the military and the police kind of cultural aspects.
So you just mentioned two things. First, you mentioned that the institutions are patriarchal, which we know, which we all know. Then you also
Yeah.
mentioned the informal norms that are then reinforced by the senior leaders who happen to be men. How does the EIF fight through first patriarchy and then the informal norms, and how difficult it is? Because it sounds near to impossible. It sounds very tough.
It is very tough. So the way that we have been set up to do this is, first of all, by working and supporting a troop and police contributing country to undergo an assessment of barriers.
Mm,
And there is a particular assessment tool that we encourage TPCCs to use, and it is called the MOIP, Measuring Opportunities for Women in Peace Operations. This is a tool that it took a couple of years to kind of research and come up and design this methodology. And what it does is it doesn't just interview women, it also interviews men to get their perspective on what some of the barriers may be for women in the institution. It's a scientific method, and it's evidence-based.
mm,
So once that assessment is done within the organization, and it needs to have high level support, when a country applies to us for funding, that proposal needs to be signed by either the Ministry of Defence, the Police Commissioner, or the Minister of Interior. So it has this kind of high level support to do this. And then once we receive the results and we receive the barrier assessment report,
mm,
um, we then use that, and the country uses that to then design uh, and implement interventions to really address some of those high level barriers.
mm.
They can come back to us for funding to do that. They can also reach out to other donors, um, and they can themselves come up with and design a plan to then really kind of address some of those barriers within the institution. And I can cite an example here
Mm.
with one of our TPCCs, Liberia, that immediately after, and in fact during the conduct of the MOEP, they had identified that they had such low numbers of women. And so they looked at why. And one of
Mm.
the reasons was that sometimes the women needed more encouragement and support to improve their physical fitness.
Yeah.
So they designed a program to support women to do this. They also had a recruitment campaign, and as a result, numbers of women applying and then being accepted into the institution has grown. So they did
Mm.
this off their own bat, came up with a plan, and then they started to implement it, which is sometimes a bit of a missing link.
Absolutely. So my next question is that in the countries where EIF is supported, they are deploying women at a significantly higher rate as opposed to the countries that where EIF is, well, they're not in collaboration. So what are some of the things or inspirations that the non-EIF countries can learn from the EIF countries? Certain models or maybe strategies?
Yeah. Um, that's a really interesting question. And I guess from the funds perspective, we are cautious to say that where countries are really doing well in this area, that it's not just attributable to the fund, it's attributable to many different factors.
Hmm.
Um, but generally, what we can say is that countries that are doing well, uh, they're not just looking at numbers, they're really trying to identify what are some of the root causes and the barriers within their country setting, within their institutions as well.
Yeah,
So I would say that they treat gender equality as an operational issue, not just a social one.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're not also looking at it as a social issue.
Hmm.
Um, there are I guess, some consistent traits in this area.
Hmm.
So there is leadership backing, and that is so important.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
they they also have kind of systematized, and made sure that their deployment kind of criteria, selection criteria to deploy is transparent, and individuals and the institution kind of abide by those.
Hmm.
Some of them are also merit-based.
Hmm.
So they are some consistent traits I think we see in these countries. Um, and then I would say that within these countries, um, they also integrate some of this into I would say their training pipelines, but also more broadly into all of their systems. So this is where we talk about recruitment, human resource policies, policies that address head-on sexual exploitation and abuse, and inappropriate behavior. So these policies themselves are not just well known in the institution, but they have plans to implement activities to really address, and for the institution and individuals to understand the importance of addressing sexual exploitation and abuse, and ensuring that the work environment is safe for women and men, including inappropriate behavior and sexual exploitation and abuse within the institution.
So I was reading your reports, and there's this concept that I found that's called gender strong units, and I found it really, really fascinating. So could you just share with me a concrete example as to how having a gender strong unit, first what it is, and how would it change the dynamics of better supporting women in the field?
Sure. So the gender strong unit is it's an we talk about it being as an Elsie fund or Elsie Initiative fund kind of construct.
Hmm.
Um, so what it is a unit that deploys, or yeah, it's a unit that a country deploys either a military battalion,
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps company, or a on the police side, a formed police unit where the percentage of women is at least 5 percentage points above what is required in the United Nations Department of Peace Operations Uniform Gender Parity Strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And that sets targets for contingents, so a formed body of either military or police,
Hmm.
that is deployed to a peacekeeping mission. And this does get quite technical, so yeah, so bear with me when I explain this. But that unit must have demonstrated that women are at least 5 percentage points above,
Hmm.
and we track that. We also make sure that that country is not then reducing the number of women in other contingents that go to other missions. So they really need to show that they are deploying increased number of women across the sorry, that the number of women doesn't fall across the board for their whole contribution to peacekeeping. Um, Women need to be in positions of command, control,
Hmm.
technical roles that
Yeah.
are non-gender stereotypical. And women and men need to have undergone training, and I would say education as well, about sexual exploitation and abuse,
Yeah.
and inappropriate behaviors. They need to demonstrate to us.
Okay.
So once they've done all of that, and they've deployed this unit, and the unit has returned home, and we verify that they've met the conditions, the premium can then be paid to the country, and they need to show us how they are going to invest that in ways that, really support the raison d'etre of that particular funding modality. So a concrete example of that for us is with Senegal,
Hmm.
um, and they have deployed units where, for the first time ever, a woman is the commander of a gender strong unit.
Wow.
Um, in fact, they've done this twice. No, they've done this 3 times now. And some of the observations that we have kind of received from the country itself is that by by enabling this premium, it incentivizes the country and the planners
Yeah.
to really ensure that they ensure that for the next rotation, they also, pay a lot of attention to the women in those units to ensure that they are either commanders or deputy commanders,
Hmm.
and that they do that planning well in advance to make sure that they can actually deploy those numbers.
Hmm.
Um, what has also been reported to us is that the culture within those gender strong units um, is improved. The men in those units have also reported that they find the culture is kind of less competitive,
Hmm.
and that it enables them to work in a much more collaborative way on the
Hmm.
ground when they do their patrolling, when they deploy, and when they interact with the local population on the ground. And it also enables them to have improved relationships with the communities on the ground. So for us, that is the most, or one of the really important kind of outcomes
Yeah.
of this. Yeah,
So you've noted that the lack of UN funding or the UN funding constraints, because UN has been going through budget cuts and stuff, is a
yeah.
major threat and also one of the biggest obstacles. So I want to know, where does this lack of funding hit the hardest? Is it in scaling new projects, or is it in maintaining the basic infrastructure that supports women on the field in peacekeeping?
It's all of those and more.
Mm,
So we were designed as an innovative pilot project to test uh, innovate or to test practical interventions on the ground.
yeah,
And we really discuss in some detail with potential fund recipients that once we have, supported them to test these interventions, that they then really need to demonstrate how they can ensure that these interventions can be maintained beyond the time period of our funding.
yeah.
That's not easy. There's a number of ways that they can do it. They can reach out to other donors to do this, but they can also commit to continuing some of these interventions within their uh, own budgets. And some of these don't need a lot of money. What they
Mm,
need is leadership, commitment,
yeah.
will, and ensuring that the members of their security institutions really understand about why this work is vital.
Mm,
Um, so yes, we know that we are hit by funding constraints,
yeah.
but we need the senior leadership government commitment. So it's not just, within the Defence Force itself or the police, but we need this strong commitment.
Mm,
And ways that they can also do this is to embed some of these activities and commitments into, for example, a national action plan on
yeah.
women, peace, and security, and just make sure that they are enabling kind of institutional reform and behavioral change within their organizations.
So you just mentioned will, and my next question hits on that. A top priority for EIF in 2025 is national ownership, enhancing
Mm,
national ownership. How do we ensure that when we know that the political will is wavering? And how do we make sure that gender equality is not just your priority, but theirs also?
mm. Um, so we do our work kind of within a broader framework, the Women, Peace and Security framework.
Yeah,
And 2025 is the 25th anniversary of UNSCR, United Nations Security Council Resolution 3025. Um, and so we are doing our work within this broader framework and a number of other resolutions, and especially 2539, which specifically talks about the requirement and why the importance of increasing the numbers of women who deploy to peacekeeping.
yeah.
Um, so for us, how do we do this? In all of the submissions and proposals that we receive from countries, we ask them to tell us, how does this particular project that you want us to support, how does this fit within your broader women, peace and security or gender machinery and framework within
Framework.
your country? So
Yeah,
tell us
national
how this
framework.
fits. Tell us how by doing this, you are translating your commitments into actions within your security institutions.
Hmm.
So, for example, do you have gender responsive budgeting as a commitment within your broader framework.
Yeah.
Tell us how you are going to budget for this once our funding finishes. So we want to, you know, see national-led reform beyond how we are supporting that country. So this is about um, institutional momentum. So where political will starts to waver or where there
Mm,
is a change in government, if we have been able to institutionalize and focus on institutionalizing momentum, no matter which side of the kind of government that this sits on, working with champions in the services and demonstrating that operational gains goes well beyond politics, um, and showing improvement on the ground, that by including women, we get better operational outcomes. That is really where we are, really trying to work and show the benefits societal wise, operational wise, and that, this is helping to contribute to more sustainable peace on the
mm.
ground.
I really like when the strategy that you mentioned, that you asked for their national framework and national action plan first before committing to, signing
Mm,
up to support whatever they want you to support, like a gender plan or maybe like peacekeeping or whatever. I think that's a fantastic strategy to know how seriously the country takes gender equality as a national priority. So,
yes.
as per your latest report, it mentioned a need for more focused projects. So I want to ask you, where have you seen the biggest gap between a project, a very well-planned project, but lack of funding? And how is that disconnect now shaping your guidance in the upcoming projects or rounds?
Mm. So in our first programming round, what we didn't have at that stage, and it's really mainly because this methodology hadn't quite been finalized, is a lot of countries um, have anecdotal based observations about where the gaps are.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is kind of anecdotal. We don't have enough facilities. We don't have infrastructure or women's accommodation.
Hmm.
So that is a kind of a structural issue. And it's not necessarily based on evidence.
Hmm.
Um, and we talk about it's not just about build it and the women will come. Um, so in our first round, we did support a number of applications for that were requesting funding to build women's accommodation.
Yeah.
Some of those countries were in the middle of doing a barrier assessment or at the early stages, but we didn't have that evidence. So we are trying to turn now, that diagnostic or diagnosis, the barrier assessment, into how to change things. So we work with countries to identify the link between the barriers and the outcomes. Um, and really, it's a shift from funding isolated activities
Hmm.
to supporting reforms that really kind of alter systems, um, supporting countries to develop, draft,
Yeah.
publish policies, and then implementing them. Um, and we are doing that in our second programming round. Um, we are supporting the Zambia Police Service, for example,
Yeah.
to develop and implement an anti-sexual harassment and abuse policy.
That's amazing.
So we're moving from just isolated kind of requests
Yeah.
to evidence-based interventions that really look at systems so that this we envisage will lead to lasting change rather than short-term fixes. We're also doing that with the Senegal Gendarmerie, again, developing gender policies. And the point that I really want to stress here is it is one thing to have a policy. We do see a lot of policies, just sitting on a shelf, and
Mhm.
sometimes they're just pulled out, dusted off, and,
Yeah.
and looked at again. But we want to also see plans on how these countries are going to implement
Mm.
and then monitor and evaluate. So looking at, the current situation now, implementing and rolling out these policies, and then in 5 years' time, being able to understand the change. So through monitoring and evaluation frameworks. So this is a long-term um, project.
Hmm.
Um, and this is where we are really, looking at identifying lasting change. So that's kind of a bit of a long-winded, but an explanation of the evolution of country requests
Yeah.
and how we are trying to support this beyond just numbers and infrastructure.
So the concept of meaningful participation is central to your mission in everything that you do. So could you illustrate an example or maybe a story as to how it looked like in the real world on the ground, as opposed to just, increasing the numbers and filling a quota?
Sure, yes. I think here I would go back to the examples of the Gender Strong Unit Premium, and this is, individuals' stories.
Yeah.
So we have one lady who deployed, first ever commander of a formed police unit. Um, and through her leadership um, of that unit on the ground, she is demonstrating that you can be a leader, you can be a commander, and you bring with you a different way of not only leading that unit,
Yeah.
but talking and reframing the conversation and leading by example
Yeah.
when you deliver your operational orders,
Hmm.
when you ask those questions to different members of your team about how are you including, gender consideration in designing your operational activities, making sure that there is balance in those teams that deploy.
Yeah.
Another example is the current acting military advisor here in New York of the United Nations Department of Peace Operations, Lieutenant General Cheryl Pierce. She is doing this in practice, and I would call this gender sensitive leadership. She is the highest ranking woman in the UN, uh, and she is working in the system here to really look at how can certainly the Office of Military Affairs become more gender sensitive through her leadership by asking the right questions of the whole team that she leads,
Yeah.
to really become more of a gender sensitive organization. It is not easy. There are many barriers.
Absolutely.
There are
Yeah.
many different frameworks and individual biases that you are working with.
That is incredibly, incredibly motivating and inspiring. Seeing a
Mm,
woman
mm,
lead and, at that level of power and then be humble and then also be
mm.
like set out a team of leaders. It's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
So my last question to you is that if you achieve that everything that you have set out to achieve. What is the one significant shift that we can see in global peacemaking 1 year from now, or maybe 5 years from now?
In 1 year from now, we would like to see TPCCs, and especially on the military side, deploying more women, especially in leadership positions, to peacekeeping. But we also know that it does take time to grow, uh, your women within your organization. And we talk about women being a capability. So this is well beyond the numbers.
Yes.
So it takes, 20 years to grow perhaps a brigadier, 25 years to grow a lieutenant general, perhaps 30. So we understand that, but it is having these countries committing to and starting, and every country is at different points along this kind of trajectory of doing this.
Yes.
So they are commitments and then turning commitments into action. In 5 to 10 years' time, what we would really like to see is countries really embedding gender, women, peace, and security into their operational frameworks as well.
Mm.
The conversation would shift from how many women to how effective is our force because it is inclusive. And we are learning from examples from other countries.
Mhm.
And we have the conversation is no longer, I don't like to use that word toxic, but it is no longer combative. It is normalized in everything we do, everything that countries do. But we also know that we're talking about cultural change, and this takes generations, and
Yes,
there is no
absolutely.
country in the world that can, hold their hand and head up to say, we've
We've
got
achieved
this.
it. Yeah, we've achieved it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely
What I
right.
would just like to say here is, as well as 2025 is the anniversary of 1325. It's also the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action.
Yes.
And what we are doing as a fund is in the next couple of weeks, we are having a mini campaign where we are showcasing stories, human interest stories about women who are leading in their own way within the UN, and some of them are, I guess, recipients of the funding that the Elsie Initiative Fund is providing. So please jump online and have a look at those. And we
Absolutely.
would be so it'd be fabulous if you could, retweet these and share these within your or across your
We would
audiences as well.
absolutely do that. You can share the links with us and we would absolutely do that. And that brings me to the end of my questions. And I just want to tell you that I've had a fantastic conversation with you. And this was like a lecture of peacekeeping about peacekeeping in encapsulated in like 30 minutes. I have learned so much that I cannot tell you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It was not even for a second I thought, okay, this is not is not related to me or something. It's I think everybody should know about this topic, and it is not niche anymore. Everybody should be sensitive towards this topic, is what I personally believe in. So,
And
if you have any concluding remarks, the audience is yours. The floor is yours.
look, I would just like to thank you for your interest and your really kind of insightful questions. This for me has been, a session or a meeting or a discussion where the questions have been, they've gone beyond scratching the surface, that it's gone down into some of, what are the key issues you're really trying to do. So I really appreciate your time, and very happy to answer any questions. You can probably tell that I'm quite passionate.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. It shines through.
and
Your passion shines through.
yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much for this amazing conversation that we've had, and we would love to collaborate more with the Elsie Initiative Fund in the future also. And I wish you the best of luck for this round. I hope you get amazing applications from all over the world, and we can increase the women presence, not in just terms of quota, but also in people becoming more sensitive and aware about this
Yeah.
whole framework and all the work that you do. So thank you so much for taking out time for modern diplomacy today.